I want to go into how Jada has been narcissistically manipulating and abusing Will Smith. And the reason why I want to do this is because this is a classic example of a relationship of narcissists, so that all of you guys who are in relationships like this can see how this plays out for yourselves and maybe potentially recognize this in yourselves. And then I'm going to give you ways that you can actually fight back and actually shift the dynamic for yourselves. Okay. So I did actually do a video on why I think that Will should actually divorce Jada now. You can definitely go back and check that out if you'd like, and why I think he should definitely get out now. But let me go into now a little bit more of the specific signs that I see that she's been manipulating him all along. And I'm saving the best one till the end. So you want to definitely wait and check that out. Okay. So as you all know, there was a slap heard around the world, seen around the world at Oscar night. He allegedly is defending her honor, because Chris Rock says something about her bald head and she's upset about it. And he has to defend her honor and goes up, slaps Chris Rock, and then even, yells obscenities at Chris. As we all know, he was laughing before that. She gives him this massive look. And I also did a video on the fact that I believe that he was triggered because his father had been beating his mother when he was a child. He was triggered about the fact that he always felt like he never properly defended his mother, even though obviously that's a unfounded sort of a thing, because he was 5, 6 years old. He shouldn't feel like he could defend his mother at that age, but he always felt like he didn't defend his mom. He didn't protect his mom. And Jada knew that. But anyway, she gives him this look. He feels triggered. Oh, I didn't defend her. He goes up and does this thing. But there's even more layers to that, because there was this whole issue about the fact that they had this open marriage. And he's now worried about the fact that, oh, if I don't do something, then what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Is she going to cheat on me again? Is she going to do something? There's always that fear of what is she going to do? But it's even worse than that, because if you go back to the history of how that open marriage even came to pass, it came to pass because before the 40th birthday, he starts planning her 40th birthday when she's 37. So 3 years before she turns 40, he's trying so hard to make her happy. What can I do to make her happy? What can I do to finally make her happy? And he's planning this thing for years and years and years. And he unveils this footage of her grandmother, and he's got this 3-day party planned. And that night he unveils this thing, and she's not even happy about it. That night she says, cancel the whole plans for the next day, basically humiliates him at her 40th birthday, says, I don't even want the next day's plans. I don't want it. I don't want it. Makes him feel like the whole party is about his ego, not about her. He ends up believing that, and they have this massive, huge blowout fight. That's what causes the big, huge rift. They say they need time apart. She asks for an open marriage at that time. He doesn't want it. He never wanted an open marriage. That's when she pulls the open marriage card. That's when she has this huge affair or whatever it is with this August Alsina rapper dude. She ends up admitting that she's having this affair. They end up going on Red Table Talk. He's humiliated in front of the world on Red Table Talk, endures her talking about it, humiliated for minutes, while she goes on and on about how she just wanted to feel good.
I just wanted to feel good. It had been so long since I felt good.
That's what it is that she said. I just wanted to feel good. And if you see his face, you could tell he's like pained. When you look at his face, he's in pain. And if you read his book, I mean, he puts women on a pedestal, and maybe he's a narcissist too. I don't know. But if he is, he's a very codependent narcissist who can't be alone because, he's very, very dependent on her. But since this whole Oscar thing has come out, it has been revealed that on her TikTok 2 days before the Oscars, she said, I don't give two craps about this bald head. So she said that.
Today, I don't give two craps what people feel about this bald head of mine, because guess what? I love it.
She's also totally not supported him with this whole thing in the sense that she said, I don't need defending. She basically has completely not supported him. And she also was saying, this is a season for healing. I'm here for it. Basically saying he needs healing. I'm not in this at all. Again, separating herself from him. I mean, she really is, again, gaslighting. Oh, and by the way, with this whole red table talk thing, she gaslights him into thinking like defending her cheating and saying, basically, it's his fault. I wanted to feel good. It's your fault. You made me feel this way. It's about him, his ego. He caused it. And he starts believing it. He believes that he caused her pain, and she gets him to feel that way. And so it's this constant gaslighting where she spins herself into she's the victim. But then again, she also says, but I don't need protecting. I'm a victim, but I don't need protecting. But yet, if you love me enough, you'll do this. If you love me enough, you'll prove it. But you can never prove it because there's this black hole. You'll never be good enough. You can never prove enough. It's this constant black hole of gaslighting. So he's like emotionally spent. You see what's going on here? That's what's happening here. He's constantly trying to prove himself, but he can never do it. He'll never be good enough. And yet she's taking away from his biggest night. She's ruining and tarnishing whenever it's possible for him to get attention. And boy, did she ever do that, because the night that should be his biggest night, where he was getting the Academy Award, she managed to tarnish, she managed to ruin for him. She was able to do that. And so I'm just saying, I want you all to see these signs. And the only way that you can turn this around, the only way you stop this is realizing that it is a black hole that you can never fill. Because when a person has that emptiness inside of them, you can never fill that hole for them. It's inside of them. And so you have to be the one who's ready to heal. And so I want you to put that in the comments right now. I'm ready to heal. I'm ready to heal. And how you start that is you stop. You recognize that they are conditioning you. It's a black hole. You see what's happening. You have to realize when they're saying it, if you loved me, you would do this. If you love me, you would do that. And that's what she's been doing with him. If you love me, you would protect me, but I don't need protecting. But I'm going to sabotage everything you're doing. And that's what's been happening. He's probably very, very codependent too. And he needs to heal his own trauma. And hopefully he's doing that also. Okay, so let's have a conversation about Meghan Markle. I actually did a video about her and the interview that she did with Oprah. It was called Prince Harry and Meghan on the Oprah show. And I did a whole breakdown on it where I actually analyzed whether or not there are narcissists in the royal family. Well, many of you did agree with me. And by the way, if you want to check out that video, go check it out. And then you can come back and watch this or go watch it after. But many of you agreed with me, but many of you did not. Many of you actually said, hey, how come you didn't call Meghan Markle out as the narcissist? How come you didn't say that? And, who knows? I mean, in some ways, maybe they all are narcissists, right? Or maybe none of them are. But as to Meghan, I do want to say I'm not a psychologist. I've studied a lot on narcissism. You can see lots of books behind me. I've kind of gotten my unofficial doctorate in it because I've done a lot of negotiating, and it was a powerful shift for me to start learning about narcissism, learning about difficult personalities, and then figuring out how to apply what I've learned about negotiation to dealing with narcissists. And so I do want to make it clear. I'm not diagnosing anyone here. I'm just speculating based on what I've read and the resources that I've reviewed. So, and by the way, the other thing I do want to make a point about is that I'm actually biracial myself. I know Meghan is also biracial. She's Black and white. I am Asian and white myself. So I want to make it clear, I have no thoughts with regard to her race. In fact, I happen to love the fact that she's biracial and mixing it up in the royal family and all of that. So with all that being said, what do we know about Meghan? Well, we know that she is biracial, as I mentioned before. Her parents were divorced. She was an actress, and she was also married once before herself and divorced once before. And she enjoyed some moderate success as an actress, I would say. She was in the show Suits for several years, but I wouldn't call her, wasn't really like an A-list actress. I mean, she was on the show, and certainly she was never nominated for any major awards. Okay. So in 2016, what happens? Prince Harry comes along, she meets him, and they start dating. She certainly knew who he was and what she was getting into. And she certainly didn't flee from that. She didn't say, oh, I don't want the attention and, any of that. But you can't really fault her for wanting to be married to a prince and all of those things. I mean, a lot of girls want that kind of thing. That's the whole fairy tale now, isn't it? So she marries Harry. Things immediately start falling apart. Things aren't working. She's not happy. The royals don't seem happy with her. She had a very different background, not even talking about race, but she was raised in America, and she wasn't raised in England. She wasn't raised around the royals and understanding what comes with that, the service and the certain types of things that they have to learn, curtsying. And I remember her talking about how she had to curtsy to the queen, even in private. And she didn't realize that was something you did in private. So, she tells Oprah on this interview that she was very unhappy. She was depressed, suicidal even. I think Harry saw shades of what was going on with his mother, because if you think about that interview that Diana did back in the 90s, she actually said a lot of the same things, that she was depressed, that she was suicidal, she had anxiety, she was having panic attacks, she had an eating disorder, she was throwing herself down steps to try to cry for help, somebody please. And the royals were sort of pushing that down and shoving it aside, and she felt very alone. And I think Harry saw shades of what was going on with Meghan in what happened with his mom. In addition to that, they were completely hounded by the press, on and on and on, wouldn't let up. And obviously, Harry, that's a very sore spot for him as well, given what happened to his mother and the fact that, she was in this car crash because the paparazzi were chasing the car that she was in France. At least that's the story. So I do want to say, when you take a look at what's going on with Meghan, it's really important to look at it in terms of what I call the 7 deadly sins, but it's the 7 things that they take a look at when you're looking at whether or not somebody has narcissistic personality disorder. And remember, I look at it as a continuum. I mean, people can have narcissistic traits. In some ways, we all want to feel seen, heard, and know that we matter. That's just makes us a human being. That certainly doesn't make us a narcissist. All people like to feel special. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. That doesn't make her a narcissist. You know, what makes people a narcissist is that they have this disorder that causes them to just be, deeply, deeply, deeply insecure, because they have no inner sense of self. They have no inner self-worth. So they feel like they have to extrapolate it all from the environment, from other people, from circumstances, from events. And that's called narcissistic supply, which is what feeds their ego. And if you want to know more about the 7 deadly sins of narcissism, definitely check out my video on that topic. But it's the 7 traits that psychologists or psychiatrists will take a look at when they're trying to diagnose whether somebody actually has the disorder, not just traits, but the disorder. So they look at whether or not somebody is shameless. Do they have magical thinking, meaning they distort everything through a particular lens to fit the narrative that they want to fit? Arrogance is number 3. Number 4 is envy, very jealous. They're jealous of people's accomplishments. They have a hard time giving credit to people. Entitlement is the next one. They feel entitled. They should have special treatment all of the time. They use people. So that's number 6 is exploitation. And number 7 is that they have no boundaries. So it's really, really hard to tell, if you look at the 2 main characteristics of narcissists, which is they have no inner sense of value. And number 2 is that they, can't feel any sense of caring or compassion or empathy for others, which manifests itself in the 7 deadly sins: the shamelessness, magical thinking, arrogance, envy, entitlement, exploitation, and no boundaries. Okay, so, but what's hard to see sometimes is how people are feeling, how they're really showing up for people. Do they care about people? Do they have empathy? It's hard to know. Is she really caring about Harry and what's going on with him? And the fact that they did this interview with Oprah while the grandfather is laying in the hospital and near death, obviously, because he's now passed. So it could be that she just has narcissistic traits, but not actually have the mental disorder, the narcissistic personality disorder. Clearly, she chased a life of being in the spotlight, but most girls do want to marry a prince, but she also was chasing a life of being as an actress. That doesn't necessarily make somebody a narcissist, right? She does seem to like being in the center of attention. You could say that just when things were calming down, she orchestrates this interview with Oprah, which comes out while the grandfather's in the hospital. It could be that that's not necessarily great timing. It could be that, hey, she just wanted to set the record straight. Most people, when they're being accused of things, feel like they want to defend themselves, feel like they want the truth to be out there, or their version of the truth. On the other hand, it could be indicative of a person who can't take criticism. Narcissists are super sensitive. For narcissists, you're either for them or you're against them. And if you're against them, then you're public enemy number 1, and they want to take you down. So it could be that she was like, okay, here's my revenge. I'm going to get Oprah to sit with me. I'm going to get Oprah to be my flying monkey. And I'm coming after all you people who didn't treat me as special as I wanted to be treated. Who knows? I mean, I have seen people criticize what she wears, how she speaks, even how she touches Harry. They're like analyzing the fact that she put her hand on his back, and that means that she's trying to control him, and or maybe she couldn't handle being a royal. But one might also argue that if she was truly narcissistic, wouldn't she have wanted to remain a royal where she gets all that special attention and gets all the accolades for being a royal, rather than being shoved aside over here and living in LA in a house like somewhat of a normal person, but also obviously a very wealthy one. But she's not going to be in the limelight as much as she might have been had she remained a royal. So I mean, some would even say that they were just unhappy in their lives, both of them. They both wanted to leave. And Harry's got this thing in his mind that his mother was depressed. His mother was potentially killed by paparazzi because they were chasing the car. And so, he might have just said, I don't want that for my wife. I don't want that for my family as well. It really could be that she's not necessarily controlling him and saying, and being that narcissist, but it could be. I mean, it certainly could be that she wanted all the attention. She wasn't getting enough of it from the royals. So let me make this huge, ruckus. Let me leave. Let me, talk to Oprah. And maybe that's her version of narcissistic supply. Maybe it is that she has little or no regard for Harry's feelings or his relationship with his family or for his family at all. But remember, it's always possible to be misinterpreting what you're seeing. We all see things based on our own lens, based on our own filter, on our own perceptions. I've heard the analogy at times where you're like watching a tennis match and some people are sitting in the stands up there and some people are sitting in the stands over here and some are right down in front, and everybody's watching the same game, but everybody has a different perception about what's happening or where the ball went or what the swing was or if the ball was in or out or whatever. We all have our different perspectives. And, sometimes no matter how hard you try to persuade someone of something, they're just not going to be swayed no matter what, right? So some of you may have already decided she's definitely a narcissist, and some of you might think she's a victim, right? Maybe she's a victim of the royals. Maybe she's a victim of racist people. Who knows? But how does this all tie back to negotiating with narcissists, which is what I teach? That is that you need to remember that people always come to negotiations with their own sets of biases, their own opinions, their own perceptions. And knowing that and knowing what they are for the other person will definitely help you develop strategy. It definitely helps you develop the leverage that you're going to need. And it can also help you build rapport. So don't be so quick to judge. Remember that you need to be flexible in your opinions of people, and they may change as you get to know them more in the negotiations. All of these are ways that you can start to gain an advantage in the negotiation. Let's talk about Kim and Kanye and their marriage, because obviously Kim has now filed for divorce. It's something that seems like it was a long time in coming. Kanye has been sort of coming unglued in the public eye, and she has been pretty much taking it for a long time, but there were a lot of things that she had to kind of take. And hey, I'm sure she's no saint either, no pun intended. I know one of their kids is named Saint. Obviously, whenever you're dealing with two people who are trying to keep a marriage going, there is a lot involved, especially with 4 little children, especially under the scrutiny of the public eye. In any kind of a marriage, it's hard. But when you add all of those other layers onto it, it's super difficult for sure. And I did break down more about Kim and Kanye's divorce in another video, and you can definitely check that out as far as what I think might actually happen, what I think they might actually be ending up fighting over, and all that sort of thing. They probably did have a prenup, but even if they had a prenup, there's certain things that'll end up potentially being a something to talk about. And I'm going to talk more about that here coming up as well. So, in the show, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, you obviously saw a lot of things going on, and you saw that Kim was definitely very smitten with him, always talking about how she was, he was her one true love. But one of the things that she said, which I thought was really interesting, is that she said, he's my biggest believer. And I think that's one of the things that he did initially. One of the narcissistic red flags, by the way, is this idealization phase, this love bomb phase. And, he really idolized her. She was his perfect specimen of a woman and all that sort of thing. And I want you to remember that narcissists don't go after you because you have so little value. They target you because you have so much, because in a lot of ways, they actually idolize you because they think that you're so perfect and wonderful. And then it actually gives them narcissistic supply to control this thing that they think has so much value. And I say thing because they don't necessarily look at you as a person. You're more like a possession to them. And so that's really one of the first red flags that there were in this relationship, is that love bomb, that idealization phase that they went through themselves. So another one is that they both need attention. She seems to be more needing like to be adored. He actually just wants attention, and he'll say and do whatever he needs to in order to get attention, even if it's not necessarily in his own best interest, which is highly narcissistic, by the way. They do make mistakes. As much as they try to tell you that they're perfect in every way and have you believing that, they definitely do make mistakes. And so some of the ways that he tries to get attention isn't necessarily so smart, like going after a beloved star like Taylor Swift, things like that. Kim has like a little bit more going for her in the sense that she's just confident in herself and in her ability to connect with the people who love her, whereas he's kind of more like coming at it from almost like a desperation, and people can sense that. I mean, he's not as stable and set in his confidence. And one of the things that I want all of you to know, if you are negotiating with anyone, but especially with narcissists, is to remember that people will think what you tell them to think. So you need to come with a sense of confidence. You need to come with that sense that you can get it done, that you're not going to be disrespected. Really, really important. So that was another one of the red flags that you could see with the Kim and Kanye situation, and how you could definitely see that it was coming. Another one is obviously there were constant cheating rumors, which I always say there's 3 deadly sins of marriage. The 3 things that, if you have any of these present, it's really, really hard to repair a marriage, which I call the 3 A's, which are abuse, addiction, or adultery. And adultery being, one of them, because all 3 of those things, they kind of rip away at the integrity of the foundation of a relationship. And if you want to know more about that, definitely check out my video on the 3 deadly sins of marriage. And another one of the red flags was the bipolar disorder. Obviously, many people stay happily married when mental illness is involved. And I would never, ever, ever slam anybody who has a mental illness, of course. I mean, but on the other hand, there were reports where Kim actually said things that he wasn't taking his medication, that he was choosing not to be treated for it. And when that happens, there's going to be all kinds of stuff that's going on in the relationship. Obviously his inability to be stable and have these manic episodes and things like that, where maybe he does things that are impulsive or hard to take. And you saw things where he was actually coming out saying he was going to run for president. And there were reports that that was like one of the last straws for her, was like that whole craziness. And, they're up and down, they have euphoria, and then they're depressed. And it's, it's hard to live with somebody when they are not allowing themselves to be treated, when they have a mental disorder, especially when you're trying to raise 4 children in the midst of all of that, right? And untreated bipolar disorder can sometimes lead to narcissistic behavior, which also is really hard to live with, and really kind of one of the deadly sins of marriage, I would say, as well too, because now you're having to deal with drama, trauma, and chaos, and all of this excessive need for admiration and grandiose delusions and God complexes and a lack of empathy and paranoid delusions, no sense of care, compassion, or empathy on your own, for you as the other person in the marriage. And that makes it extremely difficult as well. So there were a lot of red flags leading up to Kim and Kanye's relationship, and how that's going to end up affecting the divorce will remain to be seen. But obviously, if there's some kind of fight over the children and he has untreated mental disorder, that could affect his ability to get custody of the children. If there's not a prenuptial agreement, then there could be some kind of conversation around support. In general, I would definitely say it's kind of a double-edged sword when you have one party who might have a mental disorder and you want to use it against them for, custody of the children. But then you have to be careful, because if they have a mental disorder, they might turn around and say, well, then I can't work. And now you might be on the hook for some sort of spousal support, which could, may not be something that you want to pay. So you have to kind of be careful when you're making these kinds of allegations against the other party. Where are you going with that? And that's kind of part of your overall strategy. So when you are looking at any kind of a negotiation, making sure that you have an overall strategy and you figure out where it is that you actually want to go before you start slinging things around, just making sure that every single thing that you do in your negotiation is actually furthering you toward the goal of wherever it is that you want to go, right? I think that would make perfect sense. So just thinking about that when you are negotiating, and taking a look at Kim and Kanye's relationship sort of as a lesson. If you are seeing any of those red flags, if you're seeing these kinds of things happening, then maybe it's going to be time for you to at least seek counseling on your own. Start to educate yourself, start to create a plan, start to figure out what it is that you're going to do if you are in a relationship like this. One of my favorite holiday traditions is baking cookies with my daughter. We've done it every year since she was little. And now, even though we're miles apart, I can see those memories come to life again right here on my Aura frame. What if you could give a gift that brings your holidays to life all the time, every single day? And with an Aura frame, you can. I absolutely love how easy it is. You can preload the photos before you ship it as a gift, and then you can actually remotely continue to add to it. It includes photos and videos, all for free, and it comes packaged in a beautiful gift box, no price tag. Can't wrap togetherness, but you can frame it with Aura Frame. And for a limited time, you can visit auraframes.com and get $45 off Aura's best-selling carver mat frame, named #1 by Wirecutter, using the promo code Rebecca at checkout. That's auraframes.com. Promo code Rebecca. This exclusive Black Friday Cyber Monday deal is their best of the year, so order now before it ends, and make sure you mention the show when you go to checkout. Terms and conditions apply. So tell us a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about your background. It is so fascinating.
Yeah, it's it's like anything. There's a long version and there's a more precise version, and I'll go with the latter. I have worked for the last 10 to 15 years in the world of private equity. And for people who haven't really understood what that is, because it kind of gets talked about, but a lot of people don't really understand what it is. It's not just simply, where people put a lot of money into a fund and then it gets invested into buying businesses, scaling businesses, exiting. It's a bit more than that. It's a very clinical world of high net worth individuals dealing with other high net worth individuals, doing deals which can go into the 10-figure, the $1 billion range. And there is so much wealth created from this quite small ecosystem of people. There's a lot of private equity firms, when you get into it and understand how they build businesses and sell them and the pace that they do it, you can imagine it's very intoxicating and very attractive. So we can get into all of that. But if I go back a little bit before that, before private equity, I grew up in a place called Adelaide, South Australia. Now live in the UK, but that's a story in itself. Adelaide is a very small town on the south coast. It's a city, but it acts like a town. Famous for three things. Famous for lots of churches. There are more churches there than, if you look at the sort of map, you think, why the hell are there so many churches here? It's crazy. Then you've got lots of sharks. So a lot of the open water scenes from the Jaws films were filmed in South Australian waters. And then the third thing is serial killers. We have more serial killers in Adelaide per capita than any other city in the world. So as you can imagine, I didn't stay there long. I had to get out.
That's crazy.
Like, it is crazy. I went to school and university
churches
there.
And serial killers. Somehow,
oh man, like studied the bodies in the barrel Adelaide thing. And anyway, we won't go there.
How do churches and serial killers go together? I don't know.
And sharks.
I don't know.
But I say that as a bit of a joke because I started a business when I was 18 in Adelaide, which was a personal training business. And back in the late 80s, early 90s, personal training wasn't like it is today. Like, it was something that was a luxury and only very wealthy people would invest in that type of one-to-one training. And the business was successful in terms of it allowed me to study at university and get a business degree. But I knew that I needed to go and do something different. So I joke a little bit as well. My first exit, I've done 26 exits, but my first exit was for 3,000 Australian dollars when I sold that personal training gym to a friend of mine. And I left and went to Sydney, went into the world of corporate, into private equity, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but along the way, you have been, you mentioned something about Delta Force training. Like, you've done all sorts of, like, where did that even come into play? Because what I want people to understand here, and where you're going to be able to drop some amazing nuggets for people, is how you can really help people understand how you've learned how to negotiate with narcissists. And that's where the nuggets here are going to be amazing, and absolutely amazing for people. So where did that all come into play?
Yeah. So as I said, it actually started with that gym, right? Because, as an 18, 19-year-old, and as I mentioned, these are high net worth people that I'm training. Some of them are politicians, some of them are high-end surgeons, lawyers, right? And to be able to, that was the first time, if I think back, the first time I was surrounded in an environment where there were a lot of narcissists was then. Right.
Okay.
These are people who are not, used to people saying no to them or telling them what to do. Right. And here's this, 19, 18-year-old, guy going 20 more push-ups. Who are you? Come on. Right. And I didn't realize this at the time, but that was some of the best training for what was going to come, because I had a certain amount of confidence and self-belief when I was younger for various reasons. And in that environment, I didn't have any real fear. I just didn't know. And eventually I realized what I was doing in hindsight when I started to get into the world of corporate. I went to Sydney and I worked for Rupert Murdoch as part of News International. And
oh, wow.
Yeah. And that was my first foray into this kind of more business world, right? Proper kind of business. And I started off in marketing for Men's Health magazine. And then I worked in the sort of corporate strategy areas for these businesses. So I worked for News International, moved from Sydney to London, worked for another big media group over here, the second biggest consumer publishing group called EMAP. I was the marketing and strategy director for a division that was doing well over £100 million per annum. And I was in charge of acquiring and doing joint ventures with brands, big brands. And so that first personal training business that I sold for $3,000 gave me a huge amount of confidence to be able to sit across the table from Lachlan Murdoch, Rupert Murdoch's son, and not feel intimidated, right? And so for me, I had that, and I had it at an early age. And I think what was interesting about it, I didn't quite recognize what I was around. You know, there are all these people being really quite aggressive, lots of egos. And the way that I suppose, approached that was, because it's kind of like bullying, right? It's kind of like bullying.
Totally.
Someone
It is totally bullying.
And I just stood up to the bullies, because I that was what my job was. You know, people challenged me all the time back in that gym, and I was like, I'm not having any of this, right? You know, I'm here to get you a result. So you can leave your ego at the door, and we're just going to get it done. And I took that on even into some of the more corporate jobs. Now, sometimes, I'll be really, really honest here, sometimes I got fired for that. You know, I went through a few different jobs, right? But I think as I started to become more successful, because I wasn't getting pushed around, you know, I also got promoted very, very quickly. And I was a marketing director in my mid-20s. I was the CEO of a division in my early 30s. And because I was not afraid, I think, of challenging a lot of these people who were playing games, that allowed me to move into the world of private equity, where the game goes up to another level and then some, right? So what I'll say here, just to pause, is it wasn't always successful, right? You know, me going out there and having to deal with these different individuals, very successful, very wealthy people, lots of status. But because I was around them, they were my environment for pretty much my career until more recently. I got very, very good at reading different patterns and being able to adjust to those patterns to be able to get the outcomes that I needed to be successful.
Okay. And so was there a point in your life that you think that you were narcissistic or had narcissistic traits or tendencies?
100%.
Okay. And
100%.
tell me more about that.
So, as I mentioned, hindsight's great, right? When you look back and you kind of see what you were to where you are now. In the moment, I didn't realize these things, right? And it's not really about the definition of narcissism or not. It's really just you have a certain identity when you're in certain environments. It's kind of like if you're hanging around the wrong crowd too much, you end up being a bit like that, right? As a concept, if you believe in that. And I found that to be successful, to sit on boards of companies making millions, if not billions of dollars, you had to have a certain degree of arrogance, ego, narcissism to be there, right? Just to be there, because in those rooms, people go at each other. I mean, I've been in rooms where people have, you know, pushed people into a wall and stuff. And like, you know, I won't go into where that was and why, but it's pretty aggressive. And it's not just a male thing. It's predominantly a male thing in the private equity world, but it's not just that. And I remember when I got into the world of private equity, which was in sort of 2009, 2010, which was a full almost decade in that world, I remember thinking that I would have done anything to get the deal done, to get the promotion, to get the bonus, to buy the Porsche. I would have done anything. And I did, right? I did. And, you know, I remember going into businesses, doing turnarounds and just sacking everybody, right? Literally, the job was to go in, you know, if someone didn't fit the right need or capability or culture or whatever it is, they were gone. And I just didn't have any, you know, back to the whole Delta Force thing and that level of kind of how do you act under fire? You just go in there and be clinical. Now, what's interesting about that is from the outside in, I had all the material things. You know, I had the cars, I had the flying around the world in business or first class, all of that sort of stuff. But inside, I was breaking down. Right. And two things as I look back really get me. Over that 10 years, I started doing extreme endurance sports, ultra marathon running. So I ended up doing something like 67 marathons and 24 ultra marathons over about an 8-year period. At the time, I just thought, you know what, if I run these races, and remember, training for these races is as hard as the actual race themselves. Like, you'd run a marathon every Sunday morning. I get up at 4 and run a marathon before the kids got up, right? And I was telling myself that this was me training for the game. It wasn't for the race. It was training me for the boardroom, because I was trying to sort of convince myself that I was training my mindset to deal with these egos. And when I used to sit there having these quite interesting confrontations, we can get into what they look like in a sec, you know, I'd look at someone and go, yeah, dude, you can't run 100 miles. So, you know, you are not stronger than me. I wouldn't say that, but I'd be thinking that. Imagine what that feels like, right? You're in this kind of like, it's all about me beating this other person or this situation. So anyway, I'll take you to the end of this because it's worth, I think it's the time to do it. So as I'm doing these deals, I've done 117 acquisitions, as I mentioned, 26 exits. As this is all going ahead, and I'm making decisions which are at that point starting to conflict with my values and certainly my purpose now, I start getting quite sick, right? I start feeling not very good, and my body's starting to break down. Another thing happened during that time was my father, who'd left when I was 2 years of age, left our family, divorce, pretty horrific sort of things going on. He came back into my life just around when my first daughter was born, and he was very different to the person that he was explained to be. You know, when your parents break up, there's a bit of character assassination. He was a very different person to what I was told. So that started to come into play. Very successful entrepreneur, actually, and a lot of what I was doing in private equity was screwing over entrepreneurs, right? And then the final thing happened. One night we were closing this massive deal, a $2.3 billion deal. And I went to bed and I woke up about 3 a.m. and I'd broken the 2 right molars on the right side of my jaw, literally.
Because you're like just grinding your teeth at night or something?
Yeah, I mean, what the dentist, I went to the doctor first, then the dentist, and the dentist said he'd seen this before in, actually, interestingly, financial services, people who are doing hedge fund stuff, right? Yeah, it was effectively me, all the stress of a number of different things. It was building up before this because I was starting to look at myself differently, thinking, is this the person that I want to be? Is this the role model for, you know, my kids, etc., my wife? My dad comes back. He's a successful entrepreneur. When you're in private equity, your job is to buy a business as cheap as possible so that when you scale it to exit, you make as much money as possible for the investors. So my job is not to go into, you know, the entrepreneur and say, hey, we're going to pay you this amount of money for your business. And, you know, we're there to make it difficult. And then when I met my dad and realized that he was one of these entrepreneurs, I'm thinking, oh, what have I been doing? And then the deal itself was big. You know, $2 billion deal was a massive deal. So that took a lot of late nights and poor food and drinking or whatever else. And so it all just came to a head, you know, it was 2018, came to a head. And that night I remember going, you know what, I can't be in this world anymore. And I made a decision to leave. But I think, you know, to give value to people listening, it's probably worth us exploring that period of time, because that's the period of time that I was a narcissist. And that was the period of time where that's not who I truly was, but I had to be, or I certainly felt I had to be like that to be successful, maybe even to survive.
What kind of husband were you?
Vacant. What sort of father was I? Not around.
So, but your wife put up with it, huh?
She saw, I think, that there were elements in there where, you know how sometimes you catch yourself, right? There was a point where when I was my most happiest was not when I was in that environment. And sometimes you can see she could see those points of me, particularly when my first daughter, Arabella, was born. And that was one of the big shifts, as well, as much as my dad coming back. But yeah, when I think back of it, she was she saw something in me before I saw it. And we had that conversation after the teeth incident. And it was actually literally within about 2 or 3 weeks of that happening that I decided to give up the whole world of private equity.
So did you just have a breakdown? Like what happened?
I call it an awakening now, because well, what actually happened? I called up a friend after I had about 2 weeks after the teeth incident, as I call it. I thought, what am I going to do? Because this is now a sign of something, and I can't keep doing this anymore. But of course, you've built a life around this. You've built a life, kids in private school, big house, all of that. You know, my whole life is around this, and I don't want my family to suffer because I'm now going through some sort of midlife crisis, right? And so I ended up calling a friend who back at university never came out really drinking with us or playing pool or any of those sort of things. And he ended up retiring from selling his company at 28 for about 60 million Australian dollars, I think it was. And I called him up and I told him the story, and he knew what I was doing. And he's like, man, you just got to get yourself out of that. And you've got to get yourself into a different environment for a while to understand what you really should be doing. Really good advice. So I ended up going, of all places, to a Tony Robbins event. So within about a month of the teeth incident, 4 to 6 weeks, I was on a plane to Chicago from London to go to an event called Unleash the Power Within. Mm-hmm. And oh man, talk about taking me out of my comfort zone, Rebecca. I mean, like, you know, I'm walking to this crazy place, right? People are dancing and high-fiving and all sorts of stuff. And here's the funny bit, right? I had lots of Tony Robbins books on my bookshelf. I got, similar to what you've got in your background, I've got heaps of books. I love books. But I never really read them. I sort of had them, but thought, one day I might need them, which is funny.
Yeah.
Anyway, I went to this event, and I remember, you know, the first day was weird. Second day, I started crying, right? I'm like, what's going on? And by the end of it, I'm dancing and hoo-haing with everyone else. But I made a decision in those 4 days, I was there by myself, that I was not going to go back into the world of private equity in the way that I had been. I was going to create a whole different world around what I was starting to get the first instincts of what I wanted to do and could do and should do, call it purpose, mission. And when I came back, this is the interesting piece, one of the first things I actually did, one of the actions was to launch my podcast, which at that point was called Scale Up Your Business. And that was the trajectory, the pivot point, which moved me into I actually created a whole different life from that decision.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. I mean, Gary Zukav, you know, he talks about it being aligning your personality with your soul, you know, like aligning the physical self with the spirit self.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what you did. You made a decision.
Yeah. And one of the things I learned in that 4 days was this idea of mindset and heart set, and the idea every decision I'd made up until that point, knowingly or unknowingly, was a mental, logical decision. Mm-hmm. And that made me very, you know, really clinical. You know, we joke about the Delta Force thing and all that, because in private equity, we get taught really strong negotiation skills, and we get taught to be detached from outcomes, a little bit like I imagine it is when you go into a war zone. And that's why we'd have a very military view to it. But that also teaches you to not really connect with, you know, emotions. And so the reason I started crying, I think, was because it was part of a thing that Tony does at these events. But it was because I was starting to connect with emotions that I'd repressed for over a decade, possibly even more. Like the more I go back, I think, God, you know, how I am now is probably how I was when I was a teenager. So it could even be that long that I was living this different identity.
Yeah, not even connected to yourself at all. It was survival, which is what narcissists are in. They're in survival mode all the time. And that's what I say all the time. Narcissists literally are in survival mode all the time. It's scarcity mode to the utmost extreme. And it's fear-based decision-making constantly.
Yeah, that was me. And that's why I think to your question, yes, I was. Was I, yeah, maybe I found a way out. Maybe there was a point where that whole incident of 3 or 4 things hitting at once was enough of a catalyst to get me to view things differently. But there is also this image I have, or this view, where I could have stayed in that world forever. You know, I could have had those things not happened.
Many people do. If you suspect that you are married to a narcissist, well, then you probably are. But here are the actual warning signs. So before we dive into the actual warning signs, let's talk about narcissism in general. Narcissism, or narcissistic personality disorder, is a legitimate personality disorder. It is a mental disorder that, of course, obviously manifests itself in a horrific way, but it is an actual mental disorder. Some people might not be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. They might just have narcissistic tendencies or narcissistic personality traits, something like that, just the same as others who might have other types of personality disorders or traits of personality disorders. But narcissism is an actual personality disorder where somebody has an inflated sense of themselves, a deep need for attention, and a lack of empathy for others. The thing about narcissists is that they have zero sense of internal value. And I've talked about this in some of my other videos as well. They're like the hollow chocolate Easter bunnies that, you know, there's this shell, but inside there's nothing. They don't feel anything for anyone but themselves. They have a complete lack of empathy because they feel so empty inside all the time. And so the only way that they get any sense of value whatsoever is through the external, through what we call narcissistic supply, which is what it comes in the form of compliments, prestige, money, even control over others, anything that makes them feel that external sense of value, because they have no internal sense of value. So there are 3 different types of narcissists, but they all have basically the same traits. So you'll see your covert narcissist, which is what I call the wolf in sheep's clothing. And then there's the overt or grandiose narcissist, which is your regular garden variety narcissist, the one that we normally think of with narcissists, the one that goes around telling everybody how great they are all the time. And then there's the malignant narcissists, which are the ones that can be way more dangerous, way more toxic. They're the ones that can tend to even be violent sometimes, stalking, things like that. I call them the Darth Vaders of the narcissists. So while they can be broken down into 3 different categories, the psychiatrists have identified what the 7 characteristics are of narcissists. And I believe they say that if you have 5 of them, then you can be actually diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. But, you know, the thing is, most narcissists are not ever diagnosed because they don't go to psychiatrists because they don't think there's anything wrong with them. So it's really hard to say how many people actually have been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, or how many people just have the traits of narcissism or the traits of lacking empathy or feeling anything for anyone else. And, you know, if each one of these people abuses 5 people in their lifetime, which it's probably way more than that, but if they abuse only 5, then, you know, we're talking about a major piece of the population, or a major percentage of the population have become victims of narcissists. And, you know, one of the other points that I want to make here before I go into what the actual signs are of narcissism is that narcissists and empaths do have a symbiotic personality with, attraction for each other. Empaths tend to kind of almost sense that insecurity in the narcissist and somehow feel like if you just love them enough, you just give them enough, you just do enough for them, that somehow that you'll be able to solve whatever their problems are or heal them in some way, or they'll see how wonderful you are. And it just becomes a relationship of give. And then the narcissist continues to just take. And, it leaves you actually feeling empty inside. You actually feel like a shell of yourself. Because they're just trying to grab all that supply from you as they possibly can. Narcissists are attracted to the same people that everybody are attracted to. You know, they want to be with people who have wonderful characteristics, who are giving, loving, who are leaders or have accomplished a lot, or who are seen by others as wonderful. And, you know, they want some of what you have. They want to attach yourself to you to take that from you. They attach themselves almost like pods. They're like leeches or parasites that are just, they literally drain the life out of you. So if you are in a relationship with a narcissist, the chances are that you're probably an empath, which means that you're a wonderful person, a compassionate person, and you're just have been giving to the point that, you know, it literally drains the life out of you. So going back to the 7 deadly sins of narcissism, the first one is shamelessness. Narcissists don't feel any external sense of shame. They have a deep-rooted sense of shame that's inside of them, but they cover it up by being shameless to the external world. They're not bound by things that other people are bound by. Like, they're not ashamed to just go after something that wouldn't even normally be theirs, or it's not theirs, but they just do it anyway. They're proudly and openly shameless. They're not bound by emotional needs of others or wishes of others. Within this thing of shamelessness, they also loathe criticism, and they consider it toxic. They're very easily slighted. Like, you know, just the slightest amount of tone, or even if there is no tone or nothing meant by anything, they sense it anyway. It's like a dog with a dog whistle, like, you know, only they can hear it, even if it doesn't even exist. And, you know, any little whiff of anything that they're not perfect, or that they need to change, that there's something wrong with them, then it triggers their narcissistic rage and their narcissistic injury. And then, you know, you get the wrath of that. Okay, number 2 is magical thinking. Narcissists want to see themselves as perfect. And so they distort and filter everything through that lens. And so what that means is that anything that you point out to them that they're not perfect, they're going to project it onto others. They'll never take responsibility for their own actions. And so they will, you know, even if you show them proof of here's how you lied, or here's what you said, they'll distort. Well, you know that it's your fault because blah, blah, blah. Like, they won't even address that. Suddenly it'll become all about you, or all about a different person. You know, you can point out to someone, you know, you said you were going to do this, you didn't. Well, it's because I couldn't, because blah, blah, blah. It's always someone else's fault, somebody else's responsibility, someone else's problem. And within the magical thinking is gaslighting, and this is all a form of gaslighting, you know, trying to make you think that you're the one that's crazy. And I have a whole video on gaslighting tactics, and especially gaslighting tactics in divorce or breakups, and the kinds of things that they do in those times. And I will put a link to that video below. You're definitely going to want to check that out. So number 3 is arrogance. And if you're dealing with a covert narcissist, you're not going to see the arrogance right on the surface, because covert narcissists are much better at hiding their arrogance. They're much better about not being so boastful and saying, I'm the great one. And if you need to know more about covert narcissists, I will definitely drop a link to videos that I've done on covert narcissism and the covert passive aggressive narcissist below. You want to check those out. But even when you're dealing with covert narcissists, they still have that sense of arrogance, that sense that everyone should kowtow to them, that they're superior to others. And so when they feel deflated, or when they feel that sense of inferiority kicking in, the way they deal with that is reinflate their sense of self-importance by diminishing others, by debasing others, by degrading someone else, putting someone else down, being very judgmental, and basically trying to take away any sense of value for the person that might be degrading them or debasing them or devaluing them in any way. Okay, and number 4 is envy. And all narcissists have a great sense of envy. They are very jealous of other people. They're jealous of other people's accomplishments. They try to minimize other people's accomplishments, try to bring them down in some way. They just don't want anything to take away from them, because if someone else is achieving something or someone else is getting something, then somehow for them that they think that means that it's taking away from them in some way. If this is sounding familiar so far, give me an exactly in the comments. Okay, and number 5 is entitlement. Narcissists feel entitled. They feel entitled to things that aren't even theirs. You know, they'll take credit for projects that aren't theirs to take credit for. They just feel like they should be having the best table, the best everything. They should be getting promotions that they didn't even work for or weren't supposed to get. They just feel entitled to everything. And if, you know, they have these unreasonable expectations, and if they don't get this favorable treatment or this automatic compliance that they think that they should have because they're so special, then it is considered an attack. You know, even if you just want to move on with your life and have everything be split up normally, like 2 normal people, like whatever's fair under the law, well, they're not going to want to do that because that's considered an attack on them. And, you know, whether you want to leave or they want to leave, either way, you're in for it, because if you leave, or you don't give them what they want, then it, you know, it triggers their narcissistic injury and narcissistic rage. But even if they want to leave, they can't be seen as the wrong one. They have to make it your fault, your problem, somehow, so that they come out being the one that smells like the rose. So entitlement is definitely one of the main personality traits for a narcissist. So number 6 is exploitation. And this can take many forms, but basically they have no regard for others, so they use others. So they use them for whatever they think they need to use them for, whether it's, you know, money, prestige, you know, being associated with that person because they think it elevates their status in some way, using them to meet people that they might want to meet, using them to get a job that they want. You know, people are only there for their use, because your only value to a narcissist is whatever value you can bring to them. And then even when you bring value to them, that's just like the privilege of being in their space. Like, you know, you're not going to get any appreciation or recognition for bringing value to them. Like, that's just the cost of payment for being around them. So, and if you can't bring value to them, then, you know, that's where they go into the discard phase. And there's 3 different phases of a narcissistic relationship, which I will talk about in another video, but it's love bombing, devaluing, and then discard. So you see, you know, the discard once your value is no longer there anymore. So anyway, the number 6 thing is exploitation, which is, you know, where they use other people for their own gain. And number 7 is no boundaries. They don't recognize boundaries. It's all part of, you know, the fact that they believe that everything is theirs, and that whole sense of entitlement thing. But basically, you have to respect their boundaries, that they don't respect yours. That's how that goes. And it can take many different forms. I mean, you know, showing up at your place of business, calling you, texting you, expecting to know where you are at all times, expect you to answer the phone when they want you to, or be right there, but you don't have, you know, they don't give you the same thing in return. They don't tell you anywhere where they're going or what they're doing, you know, things like that. So it's part of their narcissistic supply is that they exert this control over you by not recognizing your boundaries. Time for you to spot narcissists in less than a minute flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the signs that you are dealing with a narcissist. The first one is that they need to be the center of attention. Now, there's a number of different ways that they can show up as being the center of attention. It's not always, hey, look at me, I'm the best, I'm the brightest, boasting, bragging. I used to think that that was how they always showed up. I was wrong. Believe me, when I was dealing with a covert narcissist, which was a female business partner that I had, and I've been dealing with narcissists for a long time, but it wasn't until I was a target of one that I really realized this and really started to be on this mission to help you. And that's when I started this YouTube channel, that I really realized how horrible and heinous narcissists could be. They can show up as wanting the center of attention by presenting themselves as the victim, as poor me. Oh, life is so awful. And then they manipulate people in that way. And that's actually way more toxic than the look how great I am type of narcissist. The type that shows themselves to be this person wronged me, or I can never get my way, or the type that guilts people into doing things. They're actually, I think, far worse, far stealthier, really a smarter type of narcissist. I don't want to say smarter, but a savvier type of narcissist than the boasting one that everybody kind of knows and can spot more readily. So you got to be very careful about that other type of narcissist that also wants that attention and has that need to be that center of attention, but goes about it in a different type of way. So you can spot them right away as well, but they're going about trying to be the center of attention in a different way. They're presenting themselves as the victim. But again, they have this need to constantly be the center of attention. They're just putting themselves as the center of attention in a different way. They can also put themselves as the center of attention by immediately putting themselves the center of a crisis. Somebody is sick. Somebody is hurt. They know to put themselves there right away. But you got to look to see, is this person only showing up if there's sort of like a photo op or the right people are watching, they're not necessarily helping if the right people aren't watching. That's the kind of thing that I've noticed about covert narcissists as well. They have this need to be the center of attention. Are they not helping the people in the hospital or the cancer patient or whatever if they don't think they're going to get credit for it? That sort of thing. I know that sounds horrible, but that's what really happens with these narcissists. Okay. So that's number one. And by the way, if you are negotiating with a narcissist in any sort of situation and you're trying to figure out how to do it and you're not really sure what to do, I do have a free Crush My Negotiation prep worksheet, which you can get at crushmydeal.com. And I encourage you to get it. It's a free ebook, crushmydeal.com. The second thing that you can do, that you can spot, the second way that you can spot a narcissist is, they're always going to be presenting as super charming, super persuasive, especially when they want to get something. They really know how to mirror you. They know how to look the part of charming, persuasive. They're usually well-groomed, good-looking, well-spoken, and they usually know how to read whoever it is that they want to get something from, especially at the beginning of a relationship. They definitely know how to turn that on. But even as the relationship goes on, as that bloom is coming off the rose, if you're starting to come on to them and you're starting to realize, oh, you know what, maybe I don't even want to be in this relationship anymore, they start to go, oh, well, let me snap this person back into my life. Then they pull you back in by turning that charm back on, by being persuasive again, by saying the things that you want to hear. And it's also known as future faking or something like that. And even after the relationship is over, they can come back in and turn that charm back on sometimes, which is sometimes known as hoovering. They know how to turn on that persuasiveness, turn on that charm. No one is more charming or more persuasive than narcissists. Okay, so they're incredibly, incredibly persuasive and charming. So that's the second thing. The next thing is they have a huge, huge sense, grandiose sense of self-importance. They believe that they're more important than anyone else. Not only do they think that they're more important than anyone else, but they believe that they should be treated more importantly than anyone else. And they believe that they should be treated more specially than anyone else, that they, should be the most special person in the room, that they should have special treatment. And so, this is the person who will go into restaurants and expect the best table, or expect the best treatment, or expect the best special menu, send the steak back if it's not prepared in exactly the right way. I know for me, like, I have been in situations where my husband and I have been with people who, they send food back. I'm not talking about small things, but I'm talking about where they have mistreated wait staff and been talking down to wait staff and treated people in a horrible, horrible way. And I'm telling you, it is embarrassing. I was with another family one time where the wife actually got up and left and demanded that their entire family all leave too, just because water wasn't brought to the table exactly when she wanted it and the way she wanted it, and tried to stiff the family on the wait staff on a bill, and then ended up not tipping the wait staff. I mean, it was horrible and it was horribly embarrassing. But this is the kind of thing that they do. They expect special treatment. They expect to be treated uniquely. They expect to be, catered upon, that sort of thing. And if they're not, then they take this as actual criticism sometimes, and they are extremely sensitive to criticism. So that's the next one. The next one is that they are extremely sensitive to criticism, overly sensitive to criticism, and they cannot handle being disagreed with in any way, shape, or form. Even if you're not disagreeing with them, sometimes you are actually just having your own opinion about something. But if they see this as you disagreeing with them, then it becomes this massive, huge fight. It can be embarrassing at dinner tables. It can be embarrassing at parties. And, they can actually cause issues at holidays, issues at birthdays, family parties, family reunions, even if you didn't even mean anything. They're very, very easily slighted. You can be saying, I wasn't even saying anything about you. You can be saying, let's just agree to disagree. I was not even looking your direction. But a lot of times they can't handle that. This is where you see incidents of road rage or whatever, because you see these people who are highly, highly sensitive. And what's going on is that narcissistic injury is being triggered. It causes this narcissistic rage to come flying out. And there it is, right? And so if you see that, you've spotted a narcissist. You've spotted that narcissist in 1 minute or less, right? And this is one of those signs that you are dealing with a narcissist. So we are heading down through the list, and we still have many more signs that you are dealing with a narcissist. Okay, the next one is that they need constant admiration and affirmations from others. It's like you can't say anything nice about anyone else, by the way. Like if you can just say, you could say something nice about the dog. Oh, the dog did a good job today in pet school. Did I do a good job? Did I do a good job today? You know, like they want constant affirmations, constant admiration. What about me? Did I do a good job? You know, you have to constantly be feeding that ego, that black hole that's going on inside of them. It's exhausting, quite frankly, to be around these people, because you have to almost be constantly be thinking about their ego and how are they going to be taking things and how are they going to be handling it if you do this or if you do that. And this is what you mean about this walking on eggshell thing, because if I talk to this person, how are they going to perceive this? Or if I show up in this car, how are they going to perceive that? You know, every single thing is going to have to be filtered through. How is this person going to be perceiving this? Because you have to be constantly thinking about this person's ego, right? But their need for affirmations and admiration is just constant. I remember one time I actually interviewed a secretary for a legal position, a legal secretary, and she flat out told me in the interview, I need lots of admiration. I need lots of words of affirmation. And I remember thinking, oh, thank you for telling me straight up front, because I don't want to have to be like on the hook for thinking about this all the time. Not that I don't give lots of praise to people, but I was like concerned that what if I don't give enough, and this woman was going to be thinking that I wasn't giving enough. And it was like too much pressure for me. So I didn't end up hiring her just for that reason. Okay, so the next one is they're often manipulative, using, exploiting, they take advantage of others. They want to use people. They're opportunists. These people see relationships as transactional. If I do something for you, what are you going to do for me? I'm not doing anything for you unless you're going to do something for me. It's just everything is back and forth. It's a using type of a relationship. I'm going to use you for whatever I can get out of you. And I'm assuming you're using me too. I'm manipulating you. You're going to manipulate me. It's a very mistrusting, distrusting type of world. And that's how they are in this world. Right? It's difficult to be in a relationship with them. And they lack empathy. They don't actually really care about people because they're just constantly in this scarcity mode. I don't have enough to give. And so I can't care about you because I'm in survival mode all the time. I don't have enough to think about. It's like this pain. It's like if I'm starving, I can't think about you. So that's why they don't have any empathy. This is what it is that you're dealing with when you're dealing with a narcissist. And they're jealous. They're jealous all the time because of that. They feel like everybody else has more. And so they're in this world of envy constantly and looking to see if somebody else has more than they do. And if they do, then they're They're jealous of that, because they believe that they should be better than everyone else, right? And if you've seen any of these so far, give me a totally in the comments. Just write totally in the comments. I know that you guys have. The last few that I have are that they are arrogant. They can be very, very arrogant, extremely haughty, very difficult to deal with. Oftentimes they can be impulsive. They don't think about what it is that they're doing because all they can think about is right in front of their face. So what happens is that the people around them end up having to clean up their messes. You end up being the responsible ones because they're just thinking about right in front of their face, and they don't think about long-term issues, long-term problems. And so they end up being very, very irresponsible types of people, and they're preoccupied with these fantasies of success and these fantasies of what's going to happen and power and brilliance or beauty or ideal love a lot of times. And what I see in negotiations, by the way, is they will actually take themselves down to take you down. And that's the thing that you don't even realize, by the way. I think a lot of times people are so afraid of narcissists, but they don't realize that they're actually horrible negotiators for the long term because they don't think about long term. They're actually very impulsive. They just think about, how can I get this person right now? They only think in terms of black and white, good or bad. So they just want to get the person who they perceive to be the enemy, so they want to take them down before they take you down or whatever, you could take them down or whatever, because now you're public enemy number one. And so they don't think strategically long-term the way they should a lot of times. Those are some of the ways that you can spot a narcissist in 1 minute. And that's why my SLAY methodology actually works better on narcissists than the way they negotiate, because my SLAY methodology is strategy, leverage, anticipate, and focus on you. You are actually better at being a negotiator against them than they are for themselves.